Okay, everybody. So as you can probably guess from how page two looks, page two has a lot of stuff on it to fill out. It's actually not so bad. So let's go ahead and tackle section one first. So there we go. Section one has a lot of biographical information. So number one here, you're asking for the vet's name that they had during, the time that they were in the service. So specifically, you want last, comma, first, comma, middle. So make sure you get the order there correct. But you also have the vet's social security number, date of birth, and place of birth. So ideally, you should be able to provide all of this information, and you should be able to get the vet to give you at least the branch of service, whether or not they were an officer or enlisted, and the approximate date, meaning like the month and the year that they went into the Army, the Marines, whatever, and also the month and the date in which they got out. All of that stuff, I mean, ideally you'd be able to fill in all the blanks here. However, I mean, in some situations, the vet honestly can't remember when they got out or when they went in or something. So, I mean, if this is wrong or this is wrong or something, ideally it's not going to be a big deal because with the vet's name, social, date of birth, the people who process this form should be able to find the vet's file anyway, even if some of the information here is missing or slightly incorrect. So. The only other kind of tidbit here I have is for the National Guard line right there. So I've done, I think, two cases where I've helped veterans of the National Guard get records. So in both of those cases, the records in question actually were held by the state and not the federal government. So in my case, or my case is, it was the California National Guard in Sacramento that had the records. So not the National Archives in St. Louis, not the the Marine Corps at Quantico, Virginia, nothing like that. They were at the state level, and I had to go to Sacramento to get them. So. I guess that's kind of my only, kind of practical tip, I guess. So for six, is the person deceased? Click no or yes. And then was the person, the veteran, retired? A full 20 years retired, they mean, from military service? Click no or yes. So that's section one. Hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory. Section two is a little bit harder to explain, but I'll give it my best shot. So the standard Form 180 allows you to request multiple things. So the most common one, I think, is the veteran needs a DD 214 or an equivalent. So if their records were destroyed during the fire of 1973, for example, they might have a certificate of service, which is the same thing as a DD 214. Anyway, but the DD-214, that's a very common thing for a veteran to ask for, and it helps, I guess, in processing the standard Form 180 if you could specify the year in which the veteran got the DD-214. So if it's an Army vet and he knows that he got out of the Army in 1985, chances are the DD-214 was issued in 1985, so just go ahead and type that in. So the DD-214 is, like I said, a very common thing to request. Another very common thing to request is the veteran's OMPF, that's Official Military Personnel File. And that actually, well, in theory, is supposed to include all the paperwork that vet or that service member or veteran incurred while they were in the service. So the OMPFs that I've requested, they have induction medical exams, induction dental exams, records of court-martial proceedings. I've seen records where a veteran was caught or a service member was caught, AWOL for a couple days and they got punished, had to, lose a couple months' pay, etc. So, I mean, everything and anything could be in there. So the OMPF is actually quite helpful in a lot of cases where you are trying to show you're trying to show a general thing that you might need specific evidence for. So, for example, if you need to show that the veteran has PTSD and they have that because they were constantly being attacked, the base that they were at was constantly being attacked, the OMPF might have records of, battles and, skirmishes, etc. And all of that, you can take a bunch of those and hopefully establish that PTSD actually did occur. So, anyway. So speaking of PTSD and other injuries like that, another thing that you can use the standard Form 180 for is to request medical records. And specifically, these are going to be medical records that the veteran kind of, I guess, had, I guess, or kind of resulted from treatment, medical treatment that they received while they were on a base, or that they received in battle or something. So if you know that the veteran got treated for X while he or she was stationed at, say, Fort Bliss, Texas, let's say, then you could request medical records from the hospital on base at Fort Bliss. So that's a fairly common thing to do. Number 4, or the last kind of box here. Number 4 obviously is an other field. So, I mean, if you have any other kind of specific thing that you need you think that the military might have, go ahead and specify that here. So, number 2, or kind of section 2 right here, this I think is just for statistical purposes. So, I mean, obviously it says up here that it's strictly voluntary. So the military, the VA or something, they're probably going to be interested in why veterans are requesting records. So things, if they know that, like if the VA knows that a lot of veterans are trying to request records for medical purposes or for employment purposes or benefits or something, hopefully that information will be used to service vets better in the future. So if you can, there's no kind of there's very minimal kind of privacy kind of concerns here, I think. So if you can, I would go ahead and fill in section 2. You never know what will help a vet further on down the line. So. Last section, section 3 is also pretty self-explanatory, I think. The first part, this part right here, you basically have to identify who the requester is. So the cases that I deal with, it's always the veteran himself. I think I've done a couple times it's herself, but most of the time it's men. So I usually check that box. But there are other boxes here where the veteran's deceased, and it might be the widow who's requesting records, or the legal guardian of the vet if the vet's is incapacitated in some way. So go ahead and check the box that applies to your situation. So box 2, or section 2, this is where you specify. This is where you specify who will receive the records. So a lot of times in cases that I have, the veteran puts my name and business address there. So the records themselves will actually get mailed to me. If you don't have to mail it to an attorney. You can put if you're the veteran, you can put down your own address, and the National Archives, for example, will mail you your records, directly. So. The important thing, though, I guess the one thing that the processors of this form will definitely check for is you need to have the requester signed right here and date it and put in all their contact information. So in the cases that I have, like I said, it's the veteran himself or herself who's actually requesting the records. So they sign here, date here, put their contact information, and that's fine. Yeah. So if you have a legal guardian or next of kin or something, you can sign here also. If you're the widow, let's say, but you need to submit documentation. So if the veteran's deceased, you have to submit proof of death. If the veteran has a legal guardian, you need to submit the state court paperwork establishing that. So hopefully that made sense. It's not nearly as bad, I think. The way that I usually do the standard Form 180 is that I request everything. So I check at least those 3 boxes like that. And if I have something special in that particular veteran's case, then I go ahead and check that one and specify over here what it is that I want. So hopefully that made sense. It's not bad. It's actually not a bad form. It's pretty easy to fill out once you kind of go through it a couple times. So hopefully that made sense. And let's go ahead to page 3.